its implications for a new professional role. Mr. Watson works at the British Council as a consultant for schools which have adopted the Cambridge International Examination Program and as a trainer in the CLIL methodology of bilingual teaching. He is an MA student in Applied Educational Leadership and Management at the Institute of Education at the University of London and is researching the factors of leadership which limit or empower teacher-led professional development and problem-solving in a selection of Colombian schools. Before working at the British Council, Mr. Watson had 17 years of experience in secondary education in roles of curriculum coordination, teacher training, teaching, and management. He has lived in Colombia since 2001. Let's receive Mr. Watson with a warm round of applause.
Right, good afternoon everyone. Can everyone understand me okay? Understand my British accent? Yeah, the translator? We good? Yeah? Okay, I know lunch was really nice, but Colombian food's great, but it makes you a bit sleepy in the afternoon. The good thing about Colombia, there's also lots of coffee and sugar, so yeah, pumped up, ready to go? Good. Okay, well my name's Jeff. I work now as a consultant for the British Council. And I've worked as a teacher, head of department and so forth in different programs in England and here in Colombia where I've been for 12 years. The British Council is an organisation that represents the UK in many countries around the world. And its idea is to create relationships of trust and mutual opportunities. And we do that by working through the arts, through examinations, through English teaching, and through education. And one of the programs that I work with is acting as a liaison with schools like Marymount in Medellin, who have chosen to adopt the international education program provided by the University of Cambridge, which is one of the largest providers of international education all around the world. You can see there's more than 9,000 schools involved, and it's a program that's growing in Colombia. Okay, so this afternoon, I just want to talk a little bit about what is, a vision of international education, a quite personal vision about my experience here working in Colombia, working with schools that don't always have a very international population. I know it's the afternoon slot, so I'll try not to be, it's not too much theory, okay, there's not too many bullet points. There's nice pictures and videos. We'll try to make this as interesting and practical as possible. Okay, I just want to talk about these four things. First of all, is how the influence of international education on our schools causes a certain amount of tension. Secondly, going back to what international education really means in terms of opportunities and the real inspiration and innovation it can bring to a school. Then I want to kind of make a case for the teachers. Because it's very easy to stand here and say schools should do this and now the new way to teach is this, but really thinking about the teachers' biographies, we really need to understand the challenge for them. And at the end, some solutions about things that Colombian schools are doing really well to help their teachers through this process. Okay, I just want to start with 3 assumptions, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay? The first assumption is that whether we know it or not, we are all involved in international education. And even if we don't have an I in our program, the IB or the IGCSE, we are preparing students for a rapidly changing global job market. And we're also influenced by all these ideas you've been hearing all day about what's international good practice in teaching. So the first thing is that we are all involved in international education. Okay? The second thing is, the assumption is that we see our schools as communities and we see our teachers as valuable members of that community. They're not just servants of the community, they are part of that community. And international education is a way of becoming part of a broader community. And the third thing, an assumption I want to make, is that international education is inter. It's not something, it's not a program or a recipe that we bring in and apply in our school. It's something we do in interaction, and it's something that we contribute to as much as we learn from. Okay, so I just want to start with those three basic assumptions. Now, when I started teaching 17 years ago, I didn't realise I was involved in international education. I was teaching in the north of England. I thought my career would take me as far as the local theatre. You know, at the end of my street, I was always envious of Spanish and French teachers that got to go off on exchanges. And here I am, 17 years later, stood on the stage talking at an international conference of head teachers. So it's, you know, it's an exciting ride. International education offers some amazing opportunities. Back then, I didn't realise, you know, I was supposed to be teaching digital literacy and critical thinking and all those sorts of things, but I tried to do it in a way. Interestingly, when I moved to London, I was teaching in a school, again, not having any idea of what international or global education was, where students had come from different parts of the world, and they spoke more than 54 languages in the school, and somehow I was in a situation of having to teach English to them. But we had the curriculum, which was the General Certificate of Secondary Education in England, that gave us opportunities to choose in our curriculum. You can actually choose poems and stories written by people from other cultures, from other countries, in English, and we really had a way to connect people with their cultures. But now, teaching in another country, now I realise the impact that that curriculum can have. And just in my recent studies, I was quite surprised to find out that at the same time that I was learning to teach GCSEs, in other parts of the world, they were seeing this as a way to bring democracy into their countries. And I'll be honest, I don't know much about Namibia. But, you know, I was reading recently in my studies that the Ministry of Education has passed their process of democratisation, if that's a word. You know, I had to think about reforms in education. And one of the choices they made was to use the International General Certificate of Secondary Education in the national system. And the reason was that, different from other assessments, instead of assessing a student against a set of standards, and, you know, you're tested and a number of wrong answers will tell you what your grade is, it's a system that focuses on your strengths. It lets you choose different ways of assessment, it lets you choose different subjects, there's 70 different subjects in the curriculum, and it assesses what you can do in different contexts and different ways. So this is actually quite a powerful tool that, you know, I hadn't realised teaching it in England, but around the world it takes on a different meaning. So just to give a bit of context here in Colombia, okay, in Colombia international programs arrived a long time ago, 30, 40 years ago, with the International Baccalaureate and American and British systems, and the Cambridge system came in the 80s. But it's only very recently that the real kind of methodological approach has become clear for us, and we've had the support to put this into practice. And the interesting thing is that the Colombian national curriculum today is very similar to an international curriculum. It's a very modern, progressive curriculum. If you read any document, it talks about democracy, citizenship, it talks about teachers learning through action research, it talks about all of these things. However, at the same time, the way that this is monitored is very different. So schools here have been encouraged to take on quality management systems, and auditors come in and check our processes and our paperwork. And the idea is that if we have clear processes, we can repeat them many times and they'll always be the same quality. So there's a real standardization of education. And the other is that the school leavers test in Colombia is a multiple choice exam. It's an 8-hour, so 16 years of education is evaluated in 8 hours through a multiple choice exam. And that will decide your future, your university, and so forth. Okay, so you can understand the pressure on teachers to teach in a progressive way, yet meet these very rigorous standards. So many schools have chosen international programs as a way of supplementing that, and programs that have different types of assessment, and different types of support, and different types of professional development, so they can supplement that process and really meet their goals. So we have schools very different types of schools coming into the program. So we have schools that are genuinely, international schools. They're schools with international populations. There are very few of them, but they exist, and you have to serve the needs of your community, so they have international programs. We also have schools that have the capability of bringing teachers from overseas. And so we have teachers from all around the world, from America, Canada, UK, Australia, coming into the schools and bringing that knowledge with them, their education systems, and then you have that learning together within the school. But most of the schools that
that I work with have neither. They have neither international teachers nor international students. And so the question is, how do you figure out what's international? What is international about my school? And the schools come into the program for very different reasons. Okay, some schools come in because they believe that it's coherent with their philosophy. Other schools come into the program because they believe it's a way to improve English in their school. And they realise that just having English lessons isn't going to give the students the breadth of communication they need. And this program gives them a way of learning English through a number of different subjects, and will give them that possibility. Other schools believe in what Dr. Restrepo was talking about, that being the Gloka, that we are going to give students the opportunity to study in foreign universities, learn from them, and then bring that back to our cities and our towns, and use that as a developmental tool. And other schools choose it just because it's a way to market their school. And that having an international logo on the front of their school will make them more competitive. Okay? And sadly, they have the situation where they start presenting these exams without really having changed what they've done. And it's very difficult because of the kind of results they get, and that's where they need advice and support and so forth. And this means schools approach the programs from different points of view. So if they approach it from a very kind of managerial point of view, quality management and the exams and so forth, what they do is they start by setting lots of exams to their students, seeing what they did badly, and going back and reinforcing the curriculum. But if we err too much on that kind of implementation, it's a very tense relationship between the teacher and whoever they think out there is evaluating them, between the people who expect the results, and can be alienating for the people who participate in the process. On the other hand, there are schools that come from a very kind of values-orientated process, and they build on what they know, and they build on what they believe, and they focus a lot more on, not just on results, but on what they see happening and relationships and so forth within their schools. But again, if we err too much on that extreme, then sometimes things go slowly, they stagnate, teachers leave the school, and we lose impetus. So really, we need a kind of balance with the both. And last week I went back to the graduation ceremony of the school I used to work at last year, and they had invited a professor of international education from Bath University, who had actually taught some of the people that are running our education programs. And he summed it up very clearly. He said, the program's like an iceberg. Okay, this is the exam. This is what the exam will show you. But all of this underneath, all these transferable skills, this working together, this independent thinking, this confidence, this ability to ask questions, is what's really going to carry the students through. And in the future, when this bit of knowledge that we were able to examine maybe isn't even relevant anymore, this is what will last. But you can't have this without all of this. Okay? And there's something else that he said really made me think about what international education means for us here in Colombia. Okay? And I apologise to our American visitors for by doing justice to your history. But he read this anecdote from the writings of Benjamin Franklin, who was talking about misperceptions of Native Americans. And he talks about the Treaty of Lancaster between the governor of Virginia and the leaders of the Native American nations. And part of the treaty was they said that we have a school where we train Native Americans in our ways, and if you send us 6 of your young men, we will educate them for free. And so the leaders, they went away, they thought about it, and they came back the next day, and they said, we're very thankful for your offer. I'm afraid we're going to have to decline. And what they said was this. They said, we've had some experience of your education. Several of our young people formerly brought up at the colleges of the northern provinces. They were instructed in all your science, but when they came back to us, they were bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to bear either cold or hunger, knew neither how to build a cabin, take a deer or kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly, were therefore neither fit for hunters, warriors, or counsellors. They were totally good for nothing. We are, however, not the least obliged by your kind offer, though we decline it, and to show that we're grateful, if the gentlemen of Virginia will send us a dozen of their sons, we will take great care of their education, instruct them in all we know, and make men of them. And it made me think, we'd be talking to schools about, this isn't a recipe you implement, it's not, I noticed when every time a good quote comes up on the screen, you'll take a photo of it? Yeah, and it's not a question of taking all these principles and going back to school and saying we're going to do this. We have to build our own model. And this also made me think about, what do we have to offer? You know, how can Colombia lead in international education? What do we do really well that would benefit the rest of the world? And so there's a need for schools to look at themselves differently coming into this process. So this is kind of the reason that I'm here, because at a conference at the CIE schools, of which the Marymount Medellin School was a participant, we put this idea to the head teachers, because the rest of the conference was about how to teach science and language and so forth, and we wanted to get back to these principles. You know, why are we here? Why are we doing this? So we started with where the schools are, okay, your leadership. And we decided that leadership has, in any situation, has 3 basic characteristics. Okay, there's something you believe in. You can imagine what the world would be like if everyone believed the same, and you have an idea of how to get there. Okay, so what I want you to do now, please, in your head, if you have a piece of paper, okay, I would like you to write down these 3 things for you. Now, I know your organisation has this extremely clear, okay, but I want to think about you. So the first one is, what are the values or beliefs that drive you? Why do you get out of bed every morning and drive to your school? Why are you an educator? Why are you doing the job that you do? Okay, what do you believe in? So I'll talk a bit slower if I get excited. Okay, the second thing is, what do you prize in a young person? When someone leaves your school and you think about the transformation they're going to have in their community, what qualities does that person have? Okay, someone leaving your school, what qualities do you hope that young person has? And the third thing I'd like you just to write down is, can you sum up, so you as a teacher, you as a head teacher, or whatever your role is, can you sum up your strategy in one sentence? I mean, what's the essence of your school or your classroom, or, you know, how do you do that? Okay, you got it? Just nod if you're ready. Okay. So we started looking at our schools, and then we started looking at Colombia. Okay, our national context first of all. And if you see from the sign there, it says we've got lots of things in Colombia that make us really proud, and now we're going to tell the world. And Colombia is remarketing itself. There's been a big historical change in Colombia. Its image is changing, its infrastructure is changing, security is changing, and there's a possibility of foreign interest in Colombia. So a group of business people and market experts and so forth have got together to create a brand for Colombia. And those of you who flew into Colombia, if you flew with Avianca, you will have seen a video, one of those videos of how Colombia is trying to market itself. And they've come up with a slogan. Colombia used to be the problem, but now Colombia is the answer. Okay, and if you have a question, Colombia is the answer. And if you need talent for your business, Colombia is the answer. If you want a nice place to go on holiday, Colombia is the answer. Okay, so I want you to watch this short video. I apologise if you saw this already on the plane. Okay, you'll look at it differently on the way back. And just see if you can identify the vision, the values, and the strategy that have been proposed.
see why I've lived in Colombia for the last 13 years. Okay. So this raised some really interesting questions for me, learning about this process, because it makes me think about what we're teaching in school. My first question was, do our students know all of this about Colombia? And, implications about what we should be teaching. And I know Marymount schools, one of the first schools to be taking students into the Amazon jungle and getting to know the communities and painting their faces with wheat of paint and so forth. But it also, the idea of solving problems. It's a serious image problem. How do we go about solving this problem? And this, image makeover is a very kind of Colombian way of going about things. Again, the values. The flag of Colombia, the yellow, red and blue, represents the gold, the blood, I believe, that was shed in independence in the sea. But they've taken on new meanings. So yellow is the sun and the minerals, green is the mountains and the valleys, the blue is the diversity in the sea, the red is the talent and the passion, and purple represents the flowers that we export. But again, thinking about business opportunities in Colombia, are we training our students to be able to participate in these new markets and so forth, new industries? But at the same time, there's an issue there about critical thinking as well. What's going to happen to all of these beautiful blue seas, green mountains, purple flowers, when all the businesses come in and the mining companies and so forth? What's going to happen? And so it raises some really serious issues as well about thinking critically about our country. And also about communication. And they took this idea from Google. Every time you open the Google web page, it changes every day. So they came up with this idea, they called it creative geometry. And so they can change it according to different regions or different topics, but you will always recognize it as the logo of Colombia. Okay, so that's the kind of Colombian context. So how are our schools fitting in to that? Okay? And then we talked about the international context. What's all of this got to do with what's going on globally? Now, I've just learned this myself, going back to trying to find out where international education came from. And I was learning about this man called Kurt Hahn. Do you know who he is? Anyone? Okay. He was a German before the war, and he became an educator, and he set up schools. And one thing that particularly worried him, as the world approached war, was the decline in society. And he talked about the decline of imagination, the decline of memory, the decline of physical fitness, the decline of care and diligence, and also the decline of conscience, people caring less about their fellow man. So he founded schools that had very rigorous programs, very rigorous academic programs, very rigorous physical programs. And physical education wasn't about sports, it was about discovering yourself and pushing your limits. And outdoor education, for the same reason. And then helping students to understand that they could be more than they imagined, and then putting this at the service of the community. So students were heavily involved in community work. And he thought by doing this he could maintain a kind of decent way of thinking, moral decency in a world that was moving towards war. And as war came on, he had to leave Germany. He went to England where he was educated. And then he founded a college that Dr. Strepper mentioned earlier called Goldston. And then he founded the Atlantic World College. And what was unique about this college was, in addition to all of the things I mentioned about the rigorous physical, academic, social education, was that they took students between 16 and 18 from all around the world. Remember the time of history that this was happening. So that they would talk to each other about global issues. And they would talk to people from different cultures about serious issues and find out what they had in common. And from this school grew, in part, the IB program. So coming out of this point in history, international education offers some very powerful principles. Okay, so the principle of critical thinking. If I'm really able to question and think critically and challenge assumptions, you won't be able to confuse me with an extreme ideology. Okay? If I really understand other people, and I've understood what I have in common with people from other cultures, it's going to make it very difficult for you to make me fight against them. And if I have a real problem-solving mentality and a sense of compassion, then maybe I'm going to do something about the problems that I'm surrounded by. So they're very powerful concepts at the base of our curriculum. So I just want to take these one by one and just kind of have an ideal scenario of what they might look like and how it changes the way we traditionally teach. So communication, for example. Okay, we're not just teaching languages, we're teaching students to communicate. And this is summed up very nicely. This guy, Colin Wright, you can look for him on YouTube or TED. And he's a young man who became disillusioned with his career and decided that he was going to change country every 4 months and start a new business. And he has a blog, and the people who write on his blog tell him where to go. And it's given him a very unique perspective on life. And he says this: "I wish that the knowledge that humanity has amassed could be evenly, universally available to everyone on the planet, allowing more people to have access to the resources that will allow them to contribute to the global conversation, take care of themselves and others, and pursue further innovation." Okay, so communication is about access, it's about sharing, it's about learning from each other. And this has real challenges now for how we teach language. And, you know, we need language to break down barriers. We need to communicate with people who are different from us, or maybe who don't agree with us. And there's a very strong emphasis on the audience. Who are you talking to? How are they going to react? And also, if we're really going to talk about the knowledge of the planet, we also need very specific language of all the different subject areas of science, of, you know, humanities, philosophy, and so forth. It's a much richer curriculum, shall we say. And students, bit by bit here, are beginning to communicate with other people. We hope that we'll be able to communicate with more people around the world in English, but we do things like the Model United Nations. So the students, you know, there's English models in Colombia, and now bit by bit schools are sending delegations up to New York, and they're having that experience because they are able to communicate in a meaningful way. Okay? Critical thinking. Critical thinking, very important. I mentioned earlier about you know, what would happen to Colombia if, you know, when the economic, you know, boom happens. And critical thinking is really about getting students to look around and ask really difficult questions and think about what's right and what's wrong. And in our news at the moment, it's full of people who are, you know, critical thinkers. We have the, you know, Edward Snowden, who stood up and looked at the way that the free internet has allowed us to be supervised or looked upon, and, you know, speaking against that. Or in countries around the world where trying to enter the, you know, economic international boom, they're leaving people destitute and homeless in their countries, or people standing up for rights in their countries and so forth. And we see this happening now, where students learn these transferable skills. They learn to think critically and take them to places like the Amazon, and we're here. The students start doing experiments and so forth, and they see the effect of developing on the local communities, on the environment, and they have to start dealing with these ambiguities about economic sustainability. And this is a topic we were discussing not so far away in Ecuador with our students. And problem solving. And again, problem solving is something that we learn in the classroom, but students are beginning to see problem solving in a very different way and in a very real context. Again, talking about transferable skills. I just want to share this with you. This is something that a student sent me a couple of weeks ago. She's created a project called Creative Confidence, and she's really thought about her life and, you know, what she wants to do. And she's decided that, you know, a bit like your motto is, it's about, you know, life's about injecting life into places where it's, you know, that there isn't hope, or, you know, using creative problem solving to change people's realities. And it came about as participation in this project. Okay, and I think this is a very kind of Latin way of doing things. I used to live in this city. This place is called Terron, Colorado. In Cali, the city kind of developed in the valley, but as people came from the lands where, you know, there was a lot of violence, they came to the city and they began to settle around the edges of the city up in the hills. So these are neighbourhoods that are probably not very well organised, probably not covered by public services. They're not policed. And people kind of, you know, really don't know they're there. There's really not much interest in these neighbourhoods. They're literally invisible. Okay? Just to explain the context, Terron, Colorado, it's called that because the colour of the earth. They call it Terron, Colorado. So this was their solution. The neighbourhood is invisible. So this is what they did about it.
Y entonces, eso le da una nostalgia.
Me gustaría para mí, mucho más que inclusive la parte económica, es lo más importante de este proyecto, porque la vinculación que hay entre el voluntario y la gente de la comunidad es maravillosa.
¿Y ustedes qué opinan que venga gente de los barrios a trabajar y vincular la comunidad?
Perfectamente, claro.
Tiene que colaborar ya.
Aquí normalmente gana a quien hace la comunidad. Aquí ganamos los que vamos a la comunidad.
Yo creo que el domingo es un día así como el día así para las clases con el vecino. Se va a mejorar la economía, va a haber movimiento, todo el mundo va a tener todo el mundo y de eso nos va a quedar una vista muy bonita. Las casas van a mejorar, van a tener colores, las personas se van a poner de acuerdo para limpiar. Va a ser muy importante.
Cuando conozco a alguien le cuento de dónde vivo, se puede le muestro las fotos y trato como digamos de darle idea de que mira, o sea, Cali es mucho más allá de estos frenos, mucho más allá de la ciudad como esta, sino que tiene sectores que vale la pena conocer.
Aquí hubieron niños, ancianos, mujeres, hombres, todo el mundo colaboró. Y era lo más bonito la unión que hubo entre todos y la unión que hay ahora después de
Nunca habíamos visto pues, una cosa de esas que vino, que pintura, que esas cosas de combate, pues jamás, pues el primer año, tantos años que nosotros llevamos aquí, claro, nosotros muy contentos, mejor dicho, porque ese día, como he dicho, será un bien inolvidable.
la gente veía como más seria, más apagada. En cambio ahora todo el mundo lo ve alegre, ya también más años por aquí, todo el mundo como que le dio la contenta.
Okay, so how do you make an invisible neighbourhood visible? Peter. It's a very unique approach to problem solving. And I know that it takes a lot more than that to transform a society. And I'm not suggesting that international education builds a conscience, because it's always been there. But it's the connection between the skills that are learned in the curriculum and how they're applied outside and how they feed back in. So we teach communication through English, but with an understanding of how far that can go. We teach critical thinking through science. So we teach students to ask questions, to observe, to know how to collect information, to know how to apply knowledge, to analyse it, to how to present the information and communicate it. And we teach problem solving through maths. Okay, we teach students to be able to analyse a problem, look at different solutions, carry out a task, and then evaluate how effective it was. So the point is about the connection between what these skills that we're teaching in the classroom and how they can be transferred to the world around the students. But it's not just, this is an ideal that I'm presenting. And the idea is that students have all of these experiences, they will develop these characteristics. I'll read them. First of all, the students, or global citizens as we hope they become, will be confident. And the reason they're confident is because their ideas are theirs. Okay, they haven't just received them from the teacher from a book, they've really thought about them, tested them, debated them, and so forth. Because the students are confident. Students are responsible because they understand the impact of their actions. Okay, students are reflective. Okay, because they have the skills to ask questions, they have criteria. Okay, students are innovative because if they're confident and they can reflect and they've learned to try things out at school, then they will have the confidence to innovate. And finally, they're engaged. They're engaged in education, they're engaged in their societies. And that's the idea, that's the end point. And however our Colombian model looks like, this is what we're aiming at. Students with these characteristics. Now I want you to just go back to what you wrote down at the beginning. Your beliefs, your values, and your strategy. Right? How similar is it to this? Okay, just show me your hand. There's a high degree of similarity between what you believe in, what you try to do, and what we propose to do. Right. The other half don't agree, or not understanding the translation. Okay. But it's not just an ideal that we're proposing, it's also very practical. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is a guy called Charles Fidel that talks about 21st century skills. And I saw him earlier this year, and he just presented this graph of tendencies of the kind of skills that are required in today's jobs. Now you'll notice that this is from 1999, so we'll presume that the tendencies have increased over the last 14 years. And what he shows is that non-routine manual work, okay, in the job market is decreasing, and the need for I was trying to work out what this is. I kind of think this is about fixing things, right? And how we used to fix things, and we used to have the manual to our car and so forth, but now things aren't made to be opened, and we just replace them and so forth. So that kind of specialist work, is declining. Something that made me think was this, routine cognitive work. So that's things like accountancy and so forth, things that now computers can do. And I was wondering if, this is maybe a description of a certain kind of teaching as well. Routine cognitive work, where we do the same thing. Routine manual work, the automatic or systematization of factories and so forth. And this is the interesting bit. This is what's growing. Non-routine cognitive work and non-routine interactive work, which is the kind of work we do. It's the kind of work I do. I have to arrive at a school, learn very quickly about it, help to come to solutions, creative solutions, and accompany the school in the process. So this kind of work is growing quickly. And again, I thought about what kind of teaching would that be like? What kind of model of teaching in school would help students to become accustomed to that? But the point is about developing transferable skills, critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and so forth. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and what does this mean for a teacher? I said that our schools in the programme, we've only been there for maybe 2-3 years, who's been teaching a very different way, very well, for very many years. Okay? What would the training course look like for that teacher? Right, what are we really asking these teachers to do? Okay, a teacher who's very knowledgeable in their subject, they explain things extremely well, the students are well behaved in their classrooms, and and now we're asking them to do this. So let's start off first. There's an easy description of how you teach problem solving. Okay, the first one is pretty chaotic. We're basically asking teachers to do the opposite to what they've always done. So we used to start with the answers, and now we're starting with a problem. And so instead of teaching the students some knowledge and then showing them what to do, we need to start with a task. And then we ask the students, how would you solve this? And we ask them, what knowledge do you need to be able to do this? All right, do it. And when it goes wrong, they have to evaluate it. And we're not very good at error in our schools. We don't like people getting things wrong. We punish it. But the whole point is learning from trial and error. And then when they do the problem, they get it right or wrong, the student has to be able to evaluate themselves and learn from it. Okay, so there's a process of experiential learning and so forth. So we need to help the teachers to become problem solvers. And the best way to help the teacher become a problem solver is let the teacher solve the problems. Okay, very often here in Colombia, when we have a problem, suddenly we're in an office with lots of very important people, and the problem is solved with some authority figures, and then we carry out the answer. And this is really about let teachers look at what's happening in their classrooms, get together, propose solutions, and then if we understand problem solving, we will be able to teach it to our students. Okay, but that's just the first one. Remember I talked about critical thinking? What's critical thinking? Right, we have to teach students now to ask questions. We used to give students questions to which we knew the answers. Now we want them to create questions to which nobody knows the answer yet. Okay, and we teach students to recognise assumptions. I was talking about these quotes that you've been taking photos of. They work very well in their context, but would they work here? And do we really understand the context? So we ask students to question things, to look at the context, to be critical, design methods to carry out, to test the information, to be able to present their observations in critical ways, communicate effectively, and to be able to evaluate validity. And there's different ways of doing that through science, through mathematical models, through logic, through opinion. But again, the best way to do that is to help teachers to think critically. Okay, what's going on in your classroom? What isn't working? What would you like to do? What do you suggest doing about it? How are you going to find out if it works? Okay, so that's the second chapter on the training course, the International Teacher. And on top of all of that, right, we have digital literacy. We all have to be literate. And I want you to be really honest here about how much of this you're really good at. Again, I looked around for a definition of digital literacy that was really simple. And this is a free Microsoft online program that you can do. So the first level of literacy that we all should handle is we should know what a computer is, how it works, all the words associated with computers, and how it will enhance our career if we are able to use them. That's step one. Okay, step two is understanding different programs. So basic things like spreadsheets, word processing, presentation packages like PowerPoint, and databases. Okay, do we know how to do all of those? Are we comfortable with our students doing that in the classroom? Can we model that for them? Okay, this is quite a tall order now. For the crash course for our teacher who's been teaching for 20 years. Okay? And on top of all of that, most of our teachers in Colombia in our bilingual schools are doing this in their second language. So they have to learn all this in English. But also, subject teachers have to become language teachers, because now we're talking about biology and scientific information in English. Well, the English teacher hasn't got time to teach all of that vocabulary and different ways of writing and so forth. So the biology teacher has to do it. And so they have to learn how to teach language, and they have to teach language for learning, which is all that vocabulary that I need to even begin to understand the text. Language of learning, so things like the command words and the questions, explain, describe, compare. And we have that problem so often that students know they have the knowledge, but they don't understand the question. And we mistakenly tell them that they're not very clever or so forth. And we need to be dealing with the language, and then the language through learning. Now, as I'm going beyond my textbook and exploring, coming across new texts, how am I going to learn that new vocabulary? That's the subject. And on top of all of that, okay, we propose a model called CLIL, which is about integrating language and learning, and it integrates concepts such as differentiation, scaffolding, how to understand genre, how to exploit text. In the States, we have something called sheltered instruction. That's very similar. There's a whole range of best practices. How are we doing so far? Overwhelmed? No? We're good? Okay. And on top of all of that, Okay? I have to learn something called assessment for learning. So if I really want students to be able to learn themselves, apply criteria to themselves, be independent, be confident, I have to assess them in a way that's like a dialogue. I'm constantly, I know them really well, revising their work, I'm checking back with them, and I'm helping them to be confident learners. There's 10 principles of assessment for learning. And on top of all of that, I have to do this in a global perspective because I'm an international teacher. So these are the OECD trends for education 2013. I hope you've all read it. Okay? And it talks about the diversity in the world through global migration. So our surroundings are constantly changing because of the movement of people. It has different demands on us. But many of us now, we live in cities, and all that means, and what your students do after school and in the evenings, the kind of lives they live outside of school. Also, social equality, changing families. Okay, families don't look like what they used to. Parents are busy, so now we're doing a lot of what the parents used to do at home. And on top of that, the whole issue of online vulnerability, all these issues of cyberbullying and, people putting delicate information, and, we have this problem as well. I mean, us storing information about students, things like tests and things like that, how to be careful, how to be safe online. And on top of all of that, we have to keep our identity, our cultural identity. So, as I said before, we need to know about what's happening in Colombia, what's the image that Colombia wants to present to the world, the history of my country, my nation, my ideology, the kind of resources my country has, the language, the art, and so forth, which makes for a very crammed curriculum. And students in Colombia only have 11, 12 subjects when they're in their last 2 years of school, which leaves me very little time to do all of the above things. Okay? And on top of all of that, we're supposed to be developing values, attributes, perspectives, and these reports coming out like the Haymarket report in England. And this is from Singapore, the 21st century teacher. So we wrote like the profile of the teacher. We wrote that contract. It'd be about 20 pages long. And I personally am not capable of delivering that training course. Okay, and we have to be very. I forgot to mention. And I've been through this process. And the only way that I could really have success in my classroom is understand it was by reading the theory behind it. I mean, we used to have a joke at my old school about what's on your bedside table. Yeah, and it wasn't a nice novel, it was one of these guys. Okay? And probably the teacher won't have time to do that, so they have to do it on their own time, their own initiative. They'll probably have to do it online, whether or not they're digitally literate, yeah. They'll probably have to pay for it. Okay? So it's a really tall order. Okay? And it can have different reactions, because we're really literally asking teachers to do the opposite of what we used to do. We used to make things simple, now we have to make them complex. We used to take a chaotic classroom, make everyone quiet and sit in rows and hope that the head teacher walked past and saw how. Now they walk past, people like me walk past and ask, why are they so quiet? Okay? And the whole issue of questions and who knows the answers. And if you built your career on being very good at being the expert, then suddenly, when you're being questioned, or simple things that you've been teaching all this time, and suddenly you don't have a second language, and that's going to affect your career prospects. Okay, so we really need to think about how we work, do this in a way that doesn't alienate our teachers. Okay, and we also have to be careful with the advice as well, because the research doesn't say do all of this all the time. It says there should be a balance between traditional, ordered, direct instruction and all of these things. So teachers react in different ways. Okay, so I'll start with the negative reactions. One quite common reaction is, I'm doing what you hired me to do. I'm doing what I trained to do. If students can't learn the same way I did, that's their problem. And think about it. My teachers didn't do this, so how did I learn? Okay? I love this big sign on you see on the front of his class. You have to study. Okay? I love this quote. A book I've been reading recently, I recommend, Parker J. Palmer, The Courage to Teach. And he was doing some research about teachers, and he asked his students what makes a good teacher, and what differentiates them from a bad teacher. And one student I heard about said she could not describe her good teachers because they differed so greatly one from another, but she could describe her bad teachers because they were all the same. Okay, the words floated somewhere in front of their faces like the bullying speech in cartoons. And so, when teachers are under pressure, sometimes they retreat to what they know best. Okay, retreat to the recipe. Excuse me. Okay, and one thing that we need to understand is, different from students, we can't learn in a comfortable environment, in our classroom, where we can make mistakes and there's no real consequences. We're in a situation now as teachers where everything's changing. Our instruments have changed, our methods have changed, our resources have changed. The student has changed. The division of labour has changed because now I'm not supposed to teach a curriculum, I'm supposed to invent it. Okay? And in a way, I think that's good because I think now we're being recognised as professionals, but at the same time, it's a huge responsibility. The rules have changed, so the way that we're being assessed as good teachers have changed. And we do all of this in public. Every single day we stand up in front of maybe 100 students who are nowadays quite savvy about good education. They're judging us. And then people are walking into our classrooms, people like me, people like auditors, people like heads of department coming in, parents are coming into school, they believe they know a lot about education. And so the teacher's having to learn all of this in a very public environment, and it can be very threatening. And what I'm kind of pushing for is that, is that the community is very, very supportive of the teachers in this context. And this is what he also says. He says teachers must be better compensated, free from bureaucratic harassment, given a role in academic governance, and provided with the best possible methods and materials. But none of that will transform education if we fail to cherish and challenge the human heart that is the source of good teaching. Okay, I want to continue that thread about the good teacher being a person and not a series of technologies. And an example I had recently, I was working at a school in Bogota. There was an art teacher who now has to teach art in the international program. It's a very unique experience because each student picks their own model, their own artist, they investigate, they imitate the techniques, and then they experiment within themselves and then create a work of art. And she wasn't an art teacher. I mean, she knew about art. I mean, she did some classes at university, she spoke English. So she got the job as the art teacher in the international program. And she was very worried, and she's sending all these messages, am I doing it right? Do I have the right resources? Do I know if I'm grading them properly? Is my classroom big enough? All kinds of, questions. She was really concerned. And then one day that she just took the plunge and she did a mock exam. And the mock exam is an 8-hour exam, where the students do investigation beforehand and they go into the room and they have to create a work of art in 8 hours with the materials available. And so I went to visit the school and she told me about this. She looked really worried, so I said, well, I'll come to your classroom because I wanted to give her some positive feedback. And I went into her room and there was some amazing arrangement. There was a cardboard sculpture this big, there was jewellery people had made in this exercise, there were these great big pieces of acetate paint and broken glass and propaganda and all sorts of amazing things. And she was like, do you think it's good enough? If they've done it properly? So I tried to sound all intellectual and say, well, the juxtaposition. And I could see I wasn't convincing her, so I just said, how do you feel about this? And her face changed and she said, I feel I've been given the most amazing opportunity in my life. Well, what do you mean? She said, well, I have to teach art at an art college. I have to teach them all the same thing. Most of them aren't that interested, so I teach just below the average. And that's what I do. But here, look at this, look! And to think that I was the person that could make this happen. I was the person that opened this door. Okay, so I want to, suggest that this whole exposure to international education is taking who we are and helping us to do it much, much better. I won't show you this debate now, because we don't have time, but I recommend you watch it. It's a debate organised by the British Council where they proposed that teachers could be replaced by technology. Okay? And all this critical thinking and problem solving, students could learn it online and they don't really need us. And Pamela Wright is who's one of the speakers, is the head teacher of the school that's been recognised as the best school in England, I think the last 2 years running. And she makes a very passionate defence of her teachers. And she says that, people seek interaction with other people, first of all. And it's teachers that teach students to be independent thinkers. And it's that creation, that dialogue between the teacher and the student that helps this to happen. And she says, technologies, there have always been technologies, and there will always be new technologies. And by that we also mean teaching technologies. And she says what the teacher does best is the teacher selects the technologies that the teacher needs for their students, to teach their students. And I went to, when I was researching, I went to England and I talked to head of an international training college in London. And I said, will you come to Columbia and teach us your program? He said, I can't do that. Well, why not? He said, well, the program doesn't exist. And I said, well, but you have an international program. He said, no. We teach teachers to ask the right questions about what's happening in their classrooms with their students and then know what to do with the answers. In other words, there isn't a panacea. It's something that they construct that happens also. So going back to right back to the beginning, I was telling about Namibia that I didn't know very much about. I'm going to read after the speech. And in that document from the Ministry of Education, they speculate what will this international school look like. And they say one of the great things about having a flexible evaluation system is that you don't start with the exam and work backwards and teach the students the exam, but you start where the student is, and you look at the teachers you've got, and the resources at your school, and their skills, and you build from that, and then you decide which assessments you're going to do. It's one of the great things about the international program. You can choose. And it says these interesting things. It says active student participation, we know that, a willingness by teachers and head teachers and parents and schools to let go of old ideas, and an emphasis on problem solving. One of the things about problem solving is the solution often doesn't look like what you thought it would be. When you let other people solve problems, and we have to be comfortable with that and let that happen and see if it works. Okay, and so on. Systemic use of valuable life experiences. My life as a person, my life as a teacher is relevant for these students. And we saw that video about the students in the classroom that Dr. Restrepo showed. And they said, we have all this technology, but we just Facebook to our classes. Yeah, what do those students need? More technology? No, they need a guide. Okay, and so on. Choice, flexibility and balance, a stress on the joy of teaching and learning. Okay, how do we know we're doing it right? We enjoy teaching and learning. Okay, mutual respect and cooperation of teachers. Teachers and learners are both learners and teachers. Very difficult concept for us. And every student can be successful. It's not required that someone fails to show that we're doing a good job. Okay? And this is from the Colombian curriculum, and I love that this has appeared there. It says, pedagogical practice is a gradual process which occurs in the relationship between students and teachers. This relationship is fed by the elements which each actor contributes, which include knowledge, actions, values, beliefs, and perspectives. Okay, so the question is, let me ask the same head teachers at the conference. Right, you've got these external influences, and you, with your policies and practices at school, you mediate these influences for your teachers. Okay, and whether they can do this kind of collective learning and selecting depends largely on you. And we know that head teachers have to make really difficult decisions. So, for instance, this is from Andres Schlecker, who takes the results of the PISA tests and he takes the results of the questionnaires done by the OECD, and he comes to conclusions. And this is one of the conclusions that he came to. He said that some systems that spend more or less the same money in their schools have very different outcomes. And he looks at what they spend them on. So he says in Luxembourg, for example, he spends the same here as Korea. What they spend the money on is small classes, small classes, nice facilities. They don't pay their teachers so well, and their results are, on an international scale. Whereas Korea, they have much bigger classes. They have long days, which cost more, but they spend less because they have bigger classes. But they spend their money on teacher development, and the other thing they spend their money on is giving teachers time. Okay, and if you look here, I think the yellow line is the amount of time that the teacher spends teaching, and the orange line is how much time they spend in school. So you can see how much time teachers spend in school, out of the classroom, having time to reflect, select, talk about what's happening. And this is fundamental for school efficacy. And another piece of research that I read said, if you want to guarantee that your school doesn't change, don't give teachers time to think. Just make them teach all day, and you will guarantee stasis. Okay? So we asked the teachers, so what's in your school, and now there are forces acting on you, what's helping you and helping the teachers to develop, and what's stopping this from happening? So these are some of the things that they told us. So this is an external level. So from outside of the school, they feel there's a positive commitment to parents who want the best for their children, and that's a resource. And a global tendency beginning to understand the curriculum, of humanising the curriculum, making it more democratic, making it more personal. But on the other hand, they have some very peculiar problems. For example, here, when we train a teacher, they're doing a really good job, they get snapped up by another school who can pay them. It's a very serious problem in our schools. Status of the profession, okay, the constant criticism of teachers. At the institutional level, what happens in your school with your policies and your practices that help teachers develop or stop them? So they said, well, we think that we have very positive environments in our schools. We have help from external foundations, and we have lots of resources. But on the other hand, there's a dehumanisation because we have to focus on numbers all the time. We have to focus on results, and that dominates everything. Or there's a lack of collaboration between institutions, and again we have a peculiar situation I mentioned at the beginning. The schools are competing with each other for students, and so if I share my knowledge with another school, well, maybe they'll use that and they'll beat me in the next exams. So these are some difficult issues we're facing. And here at the end, what we've just talked about: lack of time for thinking, lack of time for reflection. And finally, what amongst the teacher behaviours. So teachers who look for their own resources, teachers who are creative, teachers who are so expert in their subjects, I mean really experts, they can teach it in any way you want. And they will adapt it because they're comfortable with their subjects. Okay, and a big issue there about where we have people teaching subjects in English because they speak English and not because they're experts in their subject. And then here on the other side, activism versus time to reflect. Now, often when teachers are enthusiastic about a new program, they just try things out. And when they don't work, they say, well, I tried that. And so we really need to be well informed, well trained about these tools, and we need to have our peer group so we can talk about what's happening and how we help support. Okay? So just to finish, about 5 more minutes, these are some of the things that I think schools in Colombia are doing really well to help their teachers be leaders in the international program. Okay? And the first thing is creating a sense of security. And we talked about what happens to people when they feel pressure. Okay, and the first thing that we can do, the schools are doing well to help teachers is provide coherence for them. And a teacher is always juggling plates, juggling 5 things in the air at once. And especially when we have a quality management system, we have to produce lots of things. So the head teacher wants to know what happened to my express results, my head department wants my study plan, and the parent wants to know why her son hasn't got any homework and such is failing. And on top of that, the international coordinator's coming to watch my class going on like this. Yeah? And what I usually do is whatever's most urgent, or whoever shouts loudest. Yeah? And that goes against my professional integrity. That creates a tension for me. So one thing that schools are doing really well is providing coherence, making sure that all their processes are going in exactly the same direction, that these values that we were talking about, okay, not just delegating to different people who pull the teachers in different directions. Another thing that we're beginning to do much better is how we evaluate teachers. So from our quality management system, evaluation is generally a process of kind of grading a checklist of things that you need to fulfill, and if you don't fulfill them, you get some training, and there's that sense of always catching up. And we're beginning to build in much more formative ways of teachers being able to evaluate each other and give feedback in non-threatening environments, actually go into each other's classrooms. And one thing that we're doing at the moment, that's working really well, is we go into school for a whole week, and all the teachers observe each other, maybe twice, and they all observe twice. And then after school, we all meet together, all of us together, and we give the feedback in public, in front of everyone. So everybody's all in the same boat. We break down all of those barriers. And teachers begin to realise that actually feedback, even in a public arena, is not threatening. And they learn a lot from each other. It's a very bonding experience. Okay, so we're looking at creating a sense of security, taking away the idea of observation as judging. Okay? Another thing is to do with recognising success. This is a piece of research by the OECD, and it says, how likely are you to be rewarded if you do something right? How likely are you to be paid more? Or how likely are you to be paid less if you do something bad? And how likely are you to lose your job? And in some very kind of traditional cultures, there's a much greater emphasis on the latter. Yeah, watching our back. And we're beginning to understand the importance of recognising. And the schools I've been into that do it very well. They have a cycle of, they understand that teachers need to be competent and fulfilled. So they offer training. Teachers are trained. They do things well. They do things well. They feel better. And the school recognises it. And one of the ways they recognise it is funding more training. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle. But the interesting thing that I've discovered here in Colombia is what the teachers most want is the people at the top just to recognise what they're doing. To know them well enough, to know what's going in their classroom, to say, you know what, that was great. Just a pat on the back. I'm really surprised by that because I thought there would be a lot more vocal about pay rises and so forth, but that's what they want. They want the personal touch from somebody up there who knows what they're doing really well and recognising what they're doing. Possibilities for cooperation. So we talked about creating spaces where teachers can meet and talk together, and not with agendas set by us. Long administrative agendas, but agendas that rise, that are proposed by teachers. And one thing that we've noticed as well is how effective heads of department are in schools here in Colombia. They're not usually kind of very authoritarian figures, but the way that that person leads their team has a profound impact on how they work together and how they progress. Obviously the chance to exercise creativity and sense progress, the possibility to do things differently. Okay, here, traditionally in Colombia, we have very rigid lesson plans, very clear steps and specific documents, and we need to create spaces for people to experiment. Okay, and the importance of having a safe and secure environment in which to do that. Okay, and the last thing is about connectedness and belonging. And one thing that draws people together is when we have very clear, kind of like our moral purpose at school. And one thing we've discovered is that the head teachers of the schools have a very clear moral purpose. They know, like you have, you know why you're in this. But the teachers from the other end of the scale, when you look at what the meetings are dedicated to, and what time is dedicated to, and all the things you have to explain, sometimes there's a mismatch between what teachers are being asked to talk about and what you really believe is the purpose of education. So it's really important that that communication between head teachers and teachers is absolutely clear, so that we constantly feel that we're always going in the right direction and that we're doing what we came into education to do. Okay? But another thing about connectedness that's great about the international program is that it will take off when teachers realise they're part of something much bigger. And realise at the beginning that there are 9,000 schools in the CIE program. You become part of, these people become part of a huge international community. And the most amazing thing is when the teachers start connecting to the web pages, and we encourage them to participate in LinkedIn and so forth, and you read the questions that are posted by teachers on the other side of the world, you suddenly realise, hang on, I'm doing okay. I know the answer to that. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm doing better than I thought I was. And at the end of the promotional video for Cambridge, it says, the program makes you realise that you're not in isolation. You're working with a really large international community who will have the same problems and the same successes, but different solutions and different ideas. Okay, I'll just let you read that. Okay, so for me, the international opportunity is really this. It's understanding our strengths and weaknesses, our own, other people's, learning and supporting from each other. And that community that we work in, it starts with our school, then it connects to the broader world. Okay, just the last piece of research. It shows that when relationships improve between teachers, the relationship between teachers and students improve. And there's a lot of things that they tell you in education that they can't prove work. They sound good, but it is proven that when there is a better relationship between the student and the teacher, the student's learning is better. Okay, just a plug. 4 minutes, very British, right on time. Okay, Schools Online is a portal organised by the British Council where any of you can connect with schools across the world. Okay, it has a chance for teachers to talk to each other. You can put your school up there and encourage other schools to contact you. It has training for teachers. It has an international school award, so you can explain how you're progressing in your international program and actually receive accreditation for it. And what's really interesting, it has a host of fantastic projects that your students can do to connect with students in other countries. There's one really nice one where the students have to collect items that show their culture that will fit into a shoebox. And then they wrap it up and they send it to the other side of the world, to a school in wherever. And in that school they film as the students guess what's inside. And then they open it. And then they talk about it. And then they send that film back to the original school. Okay? And this is kind of my goal now, working with schools in Colombia, is to really make use of these kind of tools so that we can start that kind of leadership that I said at the beginning about really leading what we do well in Colombia, what makes us unique, and how we can interchange with the rest of the world. So I'll have the webpage for that at the end. Okay? And finally, a little story. A story that I was told when I came to Colombia. Okay, and I was a bit lost and a bit confused, and a friend told me the story. And he said there was a traveller walking down a road, and as he approached the village, he saw an old man sat there, and he said, "Good afternoon, sir. Are you from this village?" Yes, son. I've lived there my whole life." "Oh, fantastic. Tell me, what's life like in your village?" And the old man said, "Well, why don't you tell me first what it's like where you come from? And then I'll answer your question." So the young man says, "Well, where I come from, it's kind of difficult, you know. A few problems, people are a bit jealous, they don't always get on with each other. You know, it's not the best place to live." And the old man said, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, well, here's exactly the same. You know, you won't enjoy it." You know, off he goes. A couple of months later, another young man was walking down the road. And he walks towards the village and he sees the old man by the side of the road. And he says, "Good afternoon, are you from this village?" "Yes, I am, sir. I've lived there my whole life." "Please tell me what your village is like. I want to know whether I should visit." And he says, "Well, son, first tell me what it's like where you come from." And he says, "Oh, I come from a fantastic place. Everyone's happy, we get on well together, you know, we support each other, we laugh a lot. Yeah, it's great." And the old man said, "I'm glad to hear that. Welcome. Here's exactly the same." Really a message there about, you know, the whole idea of international education coming into an international community. It starts with how we see ourselves and how we see our schools and the kind of environment we have in our school that we then take to interact with the international community. So thank you very much for your time. Please feel free to write any suggestions or criticisms or whatever, or if you want more information about Schools Online, please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Actually, excellent walkthrough. Through research, you really brought us to the resources and research that we need to redefine our schools and redefine our roles in schools. Thank you. Let us give a round of applause to Geoffrey. We invite Mr. Alexis White from Marymount School, London, to present Mr. Watson with a token of gratitude.
Jeff, on a personal note, it was very reassuring to hear British accents today, so thank you for that. You have a real gift for putting words and experiences that are common to all of us as educators. You've helped us to identify some key challenges by providing opportunity for all of us to reflect on our own practice, which we really value. And you also prompted us to ask searching questions about why we do what we do, how we can do it better in the future. So on behalf of all the Marymount schools, many thanks for your insightful and informative presentation.